Welcome to the continuation of Part 3 to the Biblical Hebrew Israelites, picking up where we left off. Quote, the primary clade E1B1, also known as EP2 or EPN2, includes the majority of all E lineages existing today. My note, and the E lineage originates in Africa, as stated at the beginning of this article, not Europe. Quote, today there are two major surviving extensions of this haplogroup, E1B1b or EM215 and E1B1a or EV38. E1B1a is the primary subclade of E found in West Africans and many populations of Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, and observed in lower frequencies in North Africa and parts of West Asia. E1B1b is the most common E subclade amongst East African, Maasai, Somalis, Eritreans, Ethiopians, also North African Sudanese, Egyptians, Berbers, and Arabs. It's also common in Western Asia, from where it spread into the Balkans and then further into Europe. My note, the article states it's also common in Western Asia, from where it spread into the Balkans and then further into Europe. It has already been established from the beginning of this article that the E1B1 haplogroup originates in Africa. As we've just reviewed through previous examples, this happens when two different groups reproduce and the mixed offspring continues to reproduce with one bloodline or the other, which eventually breeds out one of the bloodlines. But the sex chromosome, X or Y, continues to pass down through the generations. The same is true if it is a Black person of African descent who belongs to a European or Asian haplogroup. This is just another subtle psychological mind game that is played in order to replace the indigenous people of the African continent, who since ancient times have had a healthy amount of melanin in their skin, which enabled them to survive in the hot climate of Africa and also reproduce thousands and thousands of Negroid generations to come. And we are still present today, despite the colonizers' attempt to remove us through processes of whiting out the indigenous populations. Blanqueamiento, a social, political, and economic practice used in many post-colonial countries to, quote, improve the race towards a supposed ideal of whiteness. If the mixed offspring of the first and second generation reproduces solely with one bloodline or the other, then the dominant bloodline by the third generation will be one or the other. In this case, the dominant bloodline in this third generation boy is white, European, and the Negro bloodline has been whited out. So this third generation little boy would find in his family history that his great-grandmother was a Black woman of African descent, although he carries the X chromosome of his great-grandmother who comes from the African continent. He himself is not a Negro. The same is true if it were a third generation Black boy who inherited his X chromosome from a white woman. The third generation Black boy in this case also would not be white. Interestingly enough, we do not need to explain it in the case of a Black person, as the ruling nations will be quick to remind us and the world that they are not Negroes, and Negroes are not related to them. This is politically incorrect, but absolutely true. Haplogroup E1B1A, quote, haplogroup E1B1A is the main haplogroup in sub-Saharan Africa. Over 80% of the males in West Africa fall under this haplogroup, and others suggest that it likely originated in and expanded from West Africa, i.e. the Sudan Belt, during the last 20,000 to 30,000 years, based on the fact that the frequency and divergence of E1B1A in this region are notably the highest found. With respect to E1B1A, a west to east as well as a south to north clonal distribution exists. That is, the diversity and frequency increases as you move from East and North Africa to West and South Africa. That's why it is observed in low frequencies in the Horn of Africa, Northeastern Africa, and Southwest Asia, where the E1B1b haplogroup has its lowest frequencies, and its meager presence in these areas is generally characteristic to the slave commerce and or the Bantu expansion through past migrations. My note, At the beginning of this article, it was stated that E1B1 or EP2 is likely to have originated in the Ethiopian highlands of East Africa. Then EP2 diverged into two predominant subclades, E1B1A and E1B1B, approximately 24 to 27,000 years ago. At this point in the article, it's noted that others have suggested that E1B1A likely originated in and expanded from West Africa, i.e., the Sudan Belt, during the last 20 to 30,000 years. The article also attributes the E1B1A increasing as one moves from East and North Africa to West and South Africa as being characteristic to the slave commerce and or the Bantu expansion through past migrations. Please note, it was already stated at the beginning of this article that the E1B1 DNA from which both the E1B1A and E1B1B stem originated in the highlands of East Africa. So the E1B1A did not just pop up in West Africa. The E1B1A inhabitants migrated from the east of Africa and populated the western and southern regions of Africa. What's really interesting is that the slave trade is right in line with the history of the people who have this DNA identified as E1B1A, which leads me into the next part about the E1B1A haplogroup. Under the heading E1B1A subclades, the article states, quote, E1B1A is the single most common Y chromosome haplogroup among people of sub-Saharan African descent, both inside and outside of Africa. It has been observed at frequencies of 58 to 60% of African American populations. Haplogroup E is one of the oldest branches of the human family tree. It arose 55,000 years ago, either in East Africa or Asia. During this time, the very first human migrations out of Africa have just occurred. This haplogroup is very common in Africa today, although a particular subbranch can be found in Europe. My note on a particular statement, quote, this haplogroup is very common in Africa today, although a particular subbranch can be found in Europe, end quote. Throughout this presentation, I have been highlighting how attention has been drawn to the presence of the E1B1 DNA also being found in the white Caucasian populations. This DNA originates in Africa, period. It then spread into the Mediterranean and Europe by way of Black people mingling, or in scientific terms, admixing with white people. Please keep in mind this term admixing for later in this presentation with the video clip concerning Homo sapiens both on the African continent and outside the African continent. Haplogroup E1B1A, quote, this haplogroup is predominantly sub-Saharan African and is the most common haplogroup among African Americans. Among Jews, it can be found in very small percentages, even in Jews from Eastern Europe, where there is little, if any, African influence to be found. This indicates that while this haplogroup is certainly not a founding lineage for Jews, it was present in very small amounts at the time of the formation of the ancient Israelite nation. It is possible that this lineage joined the Jewish people along with the mixed multitude described in the Bible during the Exodus from Egypt. For the purposes of this study, members of this haplogroup would be considered unlikely to have direct Jewish ancestry, since the Dominican Republic has a large African influence due to the slave trade, and this would be much more likely origin for a member from this haplogroup, family tree DNA, end quote. My note. When I first read this from Family Tree DNA, I was stunned because we have just been given a wealth of information in just this paragraph alone. Let's break it down. If you remember in part 1 of this presentation, I began by explaining how the terms Hebrew, Israel, Israelite, Jewish or Jew, and Semitic have been purposely interchanged. This has been a contributor in keeping the identity of the biblical Hebrew Israelites concealed. Recall this information and apply it as you analyze what's being said here. Quote, among Jews, E1B1A can be found in small percentages, even in Jews from Eastern Europe, where there is little, if any, African influence to be found, end quote. My note, it's vital to understand that the Jews being mentioned in this statement are the Ashkenazi and Sephardi white Caucasian people, not the Black ancient Israelites. The people who the world today understands to be the Jews of the Bible are actually people who converted to the Hebrew faith many centuries ago. You can find documentation of this in the Jewish Almanac and the Jewish Encyclopedia. Quote, this indicates that while this is not a founding lineage for Jews, it was present in very small amounts at the time of the formation of the ancient Israelite nation. End quote. My note, correct. Neither E1B1A nor E1B1B are founding lineages for either the Ashkenazi or Sephardi Jews. If the E1B1A is the DNA that was present at the time of the formation of the Israelite nation, then these are the ancient biblical Hebrew Israelites, period. To state that this DNA was present in, quote, small amounts is simply an underhanded attempt to redirect the mind from accepting the truth that has just been put before us plainly. Whether a small or large amount of the E1B1A DNA, a small amount in no way negates the presence of this DNA. Obviously, a small amount would be present when an entire nation is being formed. As Israelite men and women reproduced, the population of the E1B1A naturally increased, meaning a larger family size. Quote, it is possible that the lineage E1B1A joined the Jewish people along with the mixed multitude described in the Bible during the Exodus from Egypt. Stop. Think about this statement. The E1B1A haplogroup has been identified as the DNA of the ancient Israelite nation. So how can the Israelites be the, quote, mixed multitude joining themselves during the Exodus from Egypt? Quote, for the purposes of this study, members of this haplogroup would be considered unlikely to have direct Jewish ancestry, since the Dominican Republic has a large African influence due to the slave trade, and this would be a much more likely origin for a member from this haplogroup. Family tree DNA, end quote. My note, the slave trade is a major identifier of something that happened specifically to the Israelites per Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68 in the Bible, which states, and Yahuwah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. The word buy in this instance means to redeem. Reference the Strong's Concordance number H7069. This scripture is in connection to Leviticus chapter 25, verses 47 through 49. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger or sojourner by thee, or to the stock of the stranger's family, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him, either his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any that is nigh of kin unto him of his family may redeem him, or if he be able, he may redeem himself. Some have tried to give a weak rebuttal in stating that the Israelites were never sold because, quote, no man shall buy you. This is referring to redeeming, buying the Israelites' freedom from bondage as understood according to Yahuwah's law in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 47 through 49. If the Israelites were never sold, then they never would have ended up scattered to the four corners of the earth in the first place, in which case there would be no need for the prophets to ever speak of Yahuwah Elohim regathering all 12 tribes of Israel out of the nations in the future. Also, the scripture says in the previous sentence that, quote, ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. So the Israelites were definitely sold, period. There are many cultures around the world whose people have been put through slavery. Yes, even European people. But Yahuwah Elohim made his covenant with one group of people, which means only one group of people can be the Hebrew Israelites of the Bible. The scripture says that the Israelites will go into slavery yet again, but this time by way of ships, which would take the Israelites into all parts of the world. This time there would be no returning to the Holy Land. There would be no one to redeem or buy the Israelites' freedom out of bondage. Every people group across the world cannot claim this event in their history on the scale of that of the Negro. Another scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 26. I said I would scatter them into corners. I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. Cultures across the world still have their original names, their religious beliefs, or knowledge of their original religious beliefs, customs, practices, and anything else pertaining to their culture. They know where they come from and they know who they are. No matter the trials and tribulations brought by outsiders to put an end to their culture, they have not been completely severed from their identity. So when the world sees Black people of African descent and the diaspora trying to identify with their culture as if they are one of them, the world laughs because the world knows that the Negro has long since been severed from his identity as well as far removed from his land. Every people group across the world cannot claim this event in their history. Within Christianity, we have been taught that the 10, but more accurately, 11 tribes of Israel are lost, meaning no one knows who or where they are, and some have even taught that those tribes no longer exist. People know historically that by way of ships, the Negro has ended up permanently residing in all parts of the world and identifying with nations to whom they do not originally belong. Yes, other people who are not descended from Africa also permanently reside in other nations not their own. But on a mass scale, they did not end up there as a result of a worldwide exodus that completely severed them from their culture and identity. In a recent discussion with a dear brother in the faith, Brother Torrance, he brought something to light concerning this scripture. He added, seeing that our scholars and theologians have all agreed that no one knows who or where the quote, lost tribes of Israel are, they are confirming what Yahuwah has already said about making the remembrance of the Israelites to cease from among men. This made me think further. If we cannot identify the other 11 tribes of Israel per our scholars and theologians, then how did the ruling authorities identify the one tribe, Judah, who the world currently believes is inhabiting the land called Israel today? Like the house of Israel, the house of Judah also went into final exile, being taken captive by other nations, such as Assyria and Rome. But the house of Judah was led away captive into all parts of the world. Luke chapter 21, verse 24, and more specifically, by way of ships, as stated in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68.
And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled.
Just as Yahuwah Elohim caused the Israelites' identity to be forgotten, he also had a plan to cause their identity to be remembered. He must. Because how would Yahuwah fulfill his promise to reunite all 12 tribes of Israel in the promised land if he never allows the Israelites to again know their own identity? Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 2. And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither Yahuwah thy Elohim hath driven thee, and shalt return unto Yahuwah thy Elohim, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thy soul. The book of Baruch, which can be found in the Et Sefer and the Apocrypha, reinforces this statement from the Torah. First Baruch, chapter 2, verses 28 through 31. As thou spakest by thy servant Moshe in the day when thou didst command him to write thy law before the children of Israel, saying, if ye will not hear my voice, surely this very great multitude shall be turned into a small number among the nations, where I will scatter them. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves, and shall know that I am Yahuwah their Elohim, for I will give them an heart and ears to hear. Black people of African descent who are currently inhabitants in countries and cultures across the world, except for in Africa from where they were dispersed, are the only people to whom these scriptures could apply. We don't know who we were before we ended up on the other continents via slave ships to the west and to the east. We were dispersed worldwide from a central location, never to return to our origins by our own might. And it's only now that we are waking up to who we actually were and finding solid evidence in the scriptures, history that supports the scriptures, and genetic information about us that has remained unchanged through the generations. Again, every people group across the world cannot claim these events in their history. Back to the E1B1A haplogroup. Earlier in this presentation, I said to take note that the E1B1A haplogroup was highlighted on these maps when my search was specific only to the E1B1B haplogroup. As you see, the E1B1A shows 0% in almost all of these pictures. Seeing that this DNA is rare to almost non-existent among non-Negro people, this is the reason why the E1B1B haplogroup and its various percentages being found in the Mediterranean and European populations is so highly stressed throughout this article, because this is the closest that the nations can come to inserting themselves in place of the true Hebrew Israelites. Again, the quote from Dr. Rudolph Windsor's book makes the reason for this plain to, quote, give them, the nations, a prominent place in Afro-Asiatic history, end quote. As I did in part 2 of this presentation, again, a link to Dr. Yehoshua ben Ephraim's video on the E1B1A haplogroup is in the description box below, and he stated, quote, this haplogroup is found predominantly among Bantu, Negro descendants, to include, but not limited to, the African Lemba, many West African tribes, Igbo Jews, Yoruba Jews, African Americans, West Indians, Brazilians, Haitians, and other Negro-influenced races throughout the Caribbean and scattered across all different nations. Contrary to false DNA reporting, this is not a sub-Saharan or Hamitic haplogroup. It is Semitic in origin. Negroes have been identified as being exempt from the bloodline of Ham per the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. This haplogroup represents the Y DNA of Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. End quote. Dr. Yehoshua ben Ephraim. While putting together this presentation, I came across another article from this same website. It's entitled, The Genetics of the Jewish People. This is very interesting in helping to further connect the dots and wake up my people and anyone in the world who has ears to hear and a heart to understand. This article shows 7 different haplogroups for the white Caucasian Jewish people. Quote, the most common Ashkenazi Jewish Y chromosomal haplogroups are R1A1 and R1B. R1A1 is very common among Eastern European populations, Russians, Ukrainians, and Sorbs, Slavic speakers in Germany, as well as among Central Asian groups. However, it should be noted that a Middle Eastern origin for some R1A1 lineages cannot be ruled out. R1b is the most common Y chromosome branch of Atlantic Europe. Haplogroup R1a, believed to have originated in the Eurasian steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas, believed to have originated in a population of the Kurgan culture known for the domestication of the horse approximately 3000 BCE, also believed to be the first speakers of the Indo-European language group, currently found in Central and Western Asia, India, and in Slavic populations of Eastern Europe. R1b, the most common haplogroup in European populations, believed to have expanded throughout Europe as humans recolonized after the last glacial maximum 10 to 12,000 years ago, also the haplogroup containing the Atlantic modal haplotype. Wikipedia, Y chromosomal Levi, Ashkenazi R1a lineage, R1a Ashkenazi Levites. Also note, the E1B1 haplogroup has been observed in all Jewish groups worldwide. As we have learned in this presentation, the E1B1 haplogroup originates in Africa. The 2003 Behar investigation of Levites found high frequencies of multiple distinct markers, suggestive of multiple origins for the majority of non-Aaronid Levite families. One marker, however, present in more than 50% of Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewish Levites, points to a common male ancestor or very few male ancestors within the last 2,000 years for many Levites of the Ashkenazi community. This common ancestor belonged to the haplogroup R1A1, which is typical of Eastern Europeans or West Asians, rather than the haplogroup J of the Cohen modal haplotype. The authors propose that the Levite ancestor or ancestors most likely lived at the time of the Ashkenazi settlement in Eastern Europe and would thus be considered founders of this line, further speculating that the ancestor or ancestors were unlikely to have descended from Levites of the Near East. Both documents from DNA Ancestry and Wikipedia agree in identifying the most common Ashkenazi Jewish Y chromosomal haplogroup as R1. One more thing that I just noticed on the haplogroup descriptions. R1 spread from Central Asia into Europe, and R2 spread east into the Indian subcontinent. The document goes on to say that population movements have brought both the R1 and R2 southward into the eastern African Levant. Like the E1b1 haplogroup spreading into Europe through population movements, the R haplogroup also spread into Africa through population movements. But each haplogroup originated in their respective places, E1b1 in Africa and R1, R2 in Central Asia. Likewise, this is why you also find a higher concentration of the DNA in their respective places of origin. In connection to this information, let's revisit the study note in the Bible concerning the descendants of Japheth, Japhet.
God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant.
The study note on Genesis chapter 9, verse 27 states the following. Japheth is from the verb meaning to enlarge, and Japheth's descendants would receive the temporal blessings along with the prospect of participation with Shem, dwell in the tents of Shem. They dominated the great northern frontier from the Aegean Sea to the highlands of Iran and northward to the steppes beyond the shores of the Black Sea. From Arthur Chrysler's book, The 13th Tribe, he explains to the reader on page 24 that the Kagan was a title for the ruling officials in the Khazarian Empire. This agrees with what the Jewish Encyclopedia also says, which we just reviewed a few minutes ago. Per Ancestry DNA, the R1a haplogroup is believed to have originated in the Kurgan culture in the Eurasian steppes. As I previously stated in part 2 of this presentation, the arrival of the Jewish people in the land of Israel on May 14, 1948, was a fulfillment of Japheth dwelling in the tents of Shem. So the Ashkenazi Jews are supposed to be in the land, as well as any of the Sephardi Jews.
For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam which he did. They departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cathar, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria, and dwelt in the cities thereof.
The second Exodus is yet to come, as all 12 tribes will be brought back by the supernatural hand of Yahuwah Elohim, and not by any military government power. To date, something that has not yet occurred. I do not and would not advocate for the Jewish people to be removed from the land, as given their history of persecution worldwide, there is no place else for them to go. Numerous innocent Jewish lives have been lost, and the powers behind this are ruling the world in this present age. The Jewish people are not the enemy. They are also victims. The enemy of humanity is an invisible power using the corrupt authorities, i.e., the movers and the shakers, of this present age, whether in government, entertainment, banking, etc. But that is a topic for another time. The presence of the Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews in the land is by the hand of Yahuwah Elohim, but not for the reasons as preached by the church. The Bible is very specific and details several curses that he would place upon the Israelites, and some perpetually, meaning no end to the curse as a result of their rebellion or sin against his instructions. But one of these curses stands out among many listed in Deuteronomy because it is so plain to see and not possible to overlook, even for the willfully ignorant. The Israelites, particularly of the house of Judah, would end up dispersed to the four corners of the earth by way of ships, never to see their homeland again. This is documented both biblically and historically.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
Continuing with this article on the genetics of the Jewish people, quote, All of the Jewish populations had mitochondrial genomes of Middle Eastern origin except for the two, Ethiopian mitochondrial genomes, which are of African origin, and the B'nai Israel of Indian origin." End quote. My note: the term Middle East is a term created by the European nations that did not exist in ancient times.
North Africa and Northeast Africa, now presently the Middle East, was linked by a strip of land called the Sinai Peninsula. The completion of the Suez Canal on November 17, 1869, severed the physical link that connected North Africa and Northeast Africa. The final separation came in World War II when the war correspondents coined the term Middle East to describe the area that now encompasses Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Yemen, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar.
I've known in my heart for a very long time that I needed to go to the Holy Land. My mother's father had always proudly affirmed that he was a true black Judean. This journey was an ancestral calling to rectify the fallacies that have been perpetuated about this biblically historic land, its region, the people who claim to be its original inhabitants, and the people who have in fact lived on the land for generations upon generations. Introduce yourself and give us a brief understanding of your connection to the Holy Land.
I am Sar Madiel Ben Yehuda. Sar means minister. My title in the community, my role is minister. My portfolio is that of information. I'm charged to collect, to analyze, and to disseminate information about the Hebrew Israelites here in Israel, about our particular history as a community and our history as a people connecting back to this land. We consider Israel to be Northeast Africa. We are living here in the southern portion of Israel in what is known as the southern Judean mountains. And of course, we have to make this clear that Israel predates any Palestinian connections here to this land. When you look at the name of Palestine, it was the name that the Romans gave to the land formerly known as Judea. Now, I didn't say Jewish or Judaism, but Judea. So the Judeans were the people that actually lived in this portion of this land prior to it being named Palestine by the Romans. So this is what we consider to be Northeast Africa. We are sitting on the African tectonic plate. There are African species of birds and animals and plants that you'll find all throughout this region.
Why I took you here is that I want to show you that the country called Israel is sitting on the African tectonic plate. It's like all continents are sitting on a plate, okay? Mm-hmm. And these plates, sometimes they slide in, and they rub one another and see, and what happens, that's what happens when earthquakes happen. The plates begin to slide among one another, and if you get a crack in one of the plate, magma will come up, like a volcano. Mm-hmm. A magnum would come up, and it will cause, great devastation because of the volcano, but it's because of the shifting of these tectonic plates.
Without question, we are in Northeast Africa. We are landlocked to Egypt, with the exception of the Suez Canal, which was a man-made ditch, a boundary now between, in fact, it's not even really a boundary anymore since Egypt has reclaimed the Sinai Peninsula. But nevertheless, even those of us who are Pan-Africanists in our thinking and Afrocentric, we forget and we leave off that portion of Northeast Africa and don't want to claim anything beyond that. Of course, Afrocentrists are still fighting tooth and nail for Egypt to be included as a part of Africa, because most Egyptologists and anthropologists, archaeologists of the Eurocentric persuasion will say that Egypt is in Africa. They had to concede that, but then they still draw the line by saying that they weren't Africans like that. In other words, they weren't dark-skinned people. And of course, this is all part of the Great Deception. And the reality is that if they give up Egypt, ancient Kemet, if they give that up and say that that was a part of black Africa, then they will also have to give up Israel. And that's why they draw the line at Egypt, because if they give up Egypt, they've got to give up Israel.
Now, we're going to go over here, and I'm going to show you where Israel sits on the African tectonic plate, which means that Israel is northeast Africa. Now, when we look at this map, this is the Sinai. Okay? This is the Red Sea. This is Egypt. This is the Sinai. This is Israel. All right? This is Saudi Arabia over here. Now, if you see this in Hebrew, it says Haluach Afrikani, the African plate. Here it is right here. Israel is sitting right here. Israel is sitting on the Haluach Afrikani, which means that Israel is northeast Africa.
Continuing with the statement about Ethiopian mitochondrial genomes of African origin and the B'nai Israel of Indian origin. Like the paternal lineage for the ancient Israelites being one haplogroup, the maternal lineage for the ancient Israelites is also one haplogroup and not 7 different haplogroups, as the same paternal Y or maternal X chromosome is passed down through the generations. This map shows maternal haplogroups worldwide from A to Z. I found that Black women of African descent belong to one haplogroup, which is labeled L. I am also from this haplogroup, more specifically the L3 branch, which, quote, has been concretely characterized as representing the original human mitochondrial lineage and is found in Africa, end quote. I also learned that one woman from the L3E branch migrated outside the African continent, which gave rise to the maternal haplogroups M and N outside of Africa, and thus all of the other maternal haplogroups worldwide. The L3E branch is most common among African Americans, Afro-Brazilians, and Caribbeans. There is much to learn about this if you haven't already seen or heard of the National Geographic documentary entitled The Scientific Adam and Eve. There are other studies and sources of information to visit as well. You just have to seek out this information.
Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened.
This is why you see the Neanderthal genes in whites and Asians. For white skin in Caucasians is a genetic mutation, and that is a fact that many whites and Asians have accepted and even teach openly, and with a great deal of pride, as a matter of fact.
Really, this is going to sound silly, but this is really, really important cutting-edge genetics. One of the areas I'm really lucky I'm blessed to work in 3 distinct areas of biology: immunology, genetics, and reproduction. And on the genetics side, I get to go to conferences and hear about advances in genetics in all species. And I was just at one a couple of weeks ago down at the Cold Spring Harbor Lab in Long Island, and I learned a bit about what's being known about the genome of Neanderthals, the genetic makeup of Neanderthals. The genome sequencers, led by Svante Pabo, who works in Germany, has taken tiny little fragments of Neanderthal bones, isolated DNA, and determined the genome of the Neanderthal, and used that information to determine, using genetic methods, how long ago Neanderthals and humans were a single species, where the common ancestor was. They've also been able to compare human genomes and ask the question of whether there's any evidence of Neanderthal genes in the human genome. And they found that there is. And the amount is quite significant, upwards of 5 to 7%. Neanderthals used to live in the Neander Valley. It's You could have called it the Cayuga Lake Basin, but that's where they lived. And out of Africa came the modern humans, and the word the geneticist uses, admixed. They admixed with the Neanderthals. And they all used to live in caves in those days like this. Came out of Africa, admixed with the Neanderthals. This was Neanderthal territory. There was another group of Neanderthal-like creatures called the Denisovans. They lived up here in Siberia, and they have their genome has been sequenced. They were distinct from the Neanderthals. And so you can find in people of European and Asian ancestry evidence of about 7%, 5 to 10% of your genome is common with that of Neanderthals. We've been separated from them for 30,000 years or so. And in some of the tribes in Papua New Guinea and those islands out there, there's evidence for a different kind of genome, which is probably the Denisovan genome. And they might have 7% Neanderthal and 5% Denisovan. So they might be 12 or 15% different from us. And in fact, the Africans who came out from Africa have no evidence of any Neanderthal genes in them. No evidence of admixture. So they're the real pure humans. Homo sapiens. Really, really interesting, and it gives you a lot to think about. Right.
Please do not use this information as a means to lash out at people who have thrown all kinds of racial slurs at us, which we all know already, and I'm sure there are even newer ones with this biblical Hebrew awakening. Intelligent conversation is always welcomed. Childish play is not. I believe the Most High is unraveling the misconceptions that the world has held about the Negro and restoring us both mentally and spiritually, but not at the expense of hurting fellow human beings whom He also created in His own image. Regardless of what Satan and his demonic angels have tried to do to alter that image, everybody on this planet is still very much human. Every ethnic group of people on this planet, from Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, and Europe, have reproduced across the ethnic lines. Human beings have been and still are being created from the intermixing of these groups, as you saw in part 2 of this presentation. In the big picture, we are still brothers and sisters. Remember that God made all of mankind from one blood. We are all made in God's image, and anyone can be saved, no matter his or her ethnic background, period.
And hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of their habitation.
But on whichever side of the fence you stand concerning this Hebrew awakening, to the unregenerate who continue to willfully hurt others verbally or physically, thus saith Yahuwah,
To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time. For the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste.
Let's continue and conclude with the Biblical Hebrew Israelites, Part 3C.